Hello, friends, and welcome to Binge O'Clock, the podcast where we watch something and then we talk about it. I'm Joy Selden, and I've seen almost everything.
I'm Danielle Nga, and I've seen almost nothing.
I'm Nella, and I'm starting to feel about Sir John Barrow, 1st Baronet, the same way I feel about Robert Moses, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Are we going to hear more about that this episode, or he's at the
top of my list of notes.
The show, I need to.
Evolves. No, I'm realizing I can't get further into this series before I unpack for all our gentle listeners Sir John Barrow, 1st Baronet, because I think you really have to lay the Franklin expedition at his feet.
What's a baronet?
It's like an aristocracy thing.
No.
He was a commoner. He was born a commoner. His father was a tanner, and he was he was a second secretary of the Royal Navy.
Okay.
Yeah, but he wasn't actually a Navy man. He just was highly influential over it for 40 years. Side note, Swear Jar is in full effect. I'm trying to figure out where to donate it this time. I'm looking for either an Arctic conservation nonprofit or possibly a nonprofit that supports Inuit culture. I'm looking. I'm shopping around. But yeah, no, Swear Jar in full effect.
Yeah, taking suggestions, too. If any of our listeners wants to email us, add us on Twitter, let us know where to send stuff.
Because,
always happy to take suggestions.
These dollar bills got to go somewhere for all the cursing this show will make me do. So
there will be dollars. There will be many, many dollars.
Gonna make it rain.
But before, thank God it's dollars and not coins. No coins. No coins in the rain. Before we get too in the weeds, which we've already done it. Congratulations. We're already here. For those of you who have decided to, I don't know, if you haven't listened to the show before, or if you're brand new to the podcast, highly recommend listening to our episode 0 for this season, because Nella also provided us with some context for the Franklin expedition. But we are going to be watching The Terror Season 1. It is an American Horror Story type of show where you can sort of watch the seasons and it doesn't necessarily need to be in order because they don't connect. So we're starting with season 1. We may continue with season 2. We're still figuring that out. But it takes a historical event and supernaturalifies it. That's a word.
And makes it terrifying somehow.
Yes.
More terrifying than it already was.
Yes. Because the real death was coming from inside the cans, Danielle.
Exactly. It's like, there was plenty of terror already. What if there was something supernatural going on?
You named a ship Terror, and what did you expect?
An Erebus. But the thing, you're jumping ahead of my notes because I need to discuss the ships. But first I have to talk about Sir John Barrow, 1st Baronet.
Now, first we need to have our recap. Danielle, give us the synopsis courtesy of Wikipedia.
Alrighty, here we go. We open on James Ross speaking to an Etsilik man in a tent who encountered the expedition's last survivors under the leadership of Captain Francis Crozier, and informs Ross they were being pursued south by a creature called Toonbach and are now, quote, dead and gone. We cut to 4 years earlier, in September 1846, where Captain Sir John Franklin's Royal Navy expedition aboard HMS Erebus and HMS Terror are attempting to complete a crossing of the Northwest Passage in the Arctic archipelago. A collision with an iceberg damages Erebus's propeller, and Francis Crozier, captain of the Terror and second in command, becomes concerned about being stranded in the pack ice through winter, and recommends to Franklin that they abandon Erebus and steam south aboard Terror to avoid becoming trapped. Franklin overrules Crozier's concerns and presses the expedition further west in the belief that the ships can complete transit, but before the ships can reach open water, they become trapped in ice for the winter.
Okay, now can I talk about Sir John Barrow, 1st Baronet?
Go ahead.
Okay, I sort of touched on him in the episode 1, but I wanted to sort of unpack it a little more because as I was describing Franklin in the last episode, I didn't give enough credit where credit was due. And that credit goes to John Barrow because John Barrow, take this for failing upwards or just succeeding upwards in the weirdest way. It's not even failing upwards, but it's such like a rich person way of moving up in the world where he was teaching mathematics to the son of Sir George Leonard Stoughton. Mm-hmm. And through that, he ended up attached on the first British embassy to China as a comptroller.
It's always like, I knew this person who knows that person who knows this person, and they put in a good word. And all of a sudden, Yeah,
and then he ends up private secretary to another lord to go, reconcile the Boer settlers in fucking South Africa. And then, so all this is happening. And then he returns in 1804 and he gets appointed the second secretary to the Admiralty by Viscount Melville. Wasn't even a Navy man. He was a secretary. And in the 40 years he was at this post, he just took it and ran. He completely reformed the Royal Navy and was like stupidly influential in wars, in colonization, in exploration, and his major bugbear under his skin was the Northwest Passage. That was his thing. He wanted the audacious coup to demonstrate to the world the dominance of England's Navy, science, and technology. And to him, the Northwest Passage was that white whale.
This was it.
Was.
So are we led to believe that he was just exceptionally charismatic? Like, just one of those
I think he was just exceptionally on top of his job. Like, I just feel like for the Navy, he was one of the smarter guys in the room.
Okay.
And he just, it's so much to unpack.
Alexander
and there's
Hamilton
so much more research I have to do about him before I can really talk. But I both love him and I hate him. I don't know how to explain this. Like, I'm just like, I love him and I hate him.
Right.
So,
because again, like, I'm coming in with very little, with precisely the amount of background knowledge that you have given our listeners, which is the background knowledge from episode 0.
Yes.
So I have that, and I have one episode of this TV show, right? And from those two things, what I've gathered is he's very charismatic. And maybe that's just how the TV show has decided to spin it. Because that's
this is Barrow. We haven't really met Barrow yet in the show.
Oh, I thought he was at the opera. Is he not at the opera?
No. That's Ross. That's James Clark Ross. We're gonna get to James Clark Ross.
Oh,
I know.
I had the wrong guy in my head. This whole
gentle
time.
listener. One of the problems of the show when you first start it is the white blindness that happens. It's like snow blindness, but for like TV, where it's just like there's too many white men and not enough names clearly stated, and you're just like, who are these white people? I don't know.
They all look different, and the names are all said. But the names all blur together because they're all just some version of
James.
I don't need.
There's so many Jameses.
James, John, Fitz something, this, that. I was like, I don't know.
So this is why I'm going to take you by the hand, Danielle, and I'm going to guide you through all the Jameses and Johnses and everybody on this goddamn
90% of my notes for a really long time, it said. The notes I took had the people listed as the guy who's in everything. You can guess who that is. The guy
Jared
who's
Harris.
in
Jared Harris.
The guy who's in GOT. Guess who that is? And then guy from Sherlock, the doctor. And I just there was he played.
See, one of the doctors is in the new Lord of the Rings Amazon series, and every time I see him, I'm like, you! Which I haven't even seen it, but I just know his face.
I have seen it, and I don't recall.
He's like the elf. Elf. Yeah, he's
not
the elf.
Not the doctor I was thinking about. I was thinking about the lead doctor who's kind of a jerk.
So that's the doctor, and we're already off the rails.
That's the guy who was at John's wedding, in the wedding episode in Sherlock.
I have so many notes trying to unpack who's who, and we're already off the rails. Amazing.
That's how I kept straight who's who.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fair.
I love that Jared Harris is the man who's in everything.
He is the man who's in everything.
He is, though.
No, like if I had a dime for every time Jared Harris played a character who was like the truth sayer who was doomed, I'd have 2 dimes. That's not very often, but it's weird it's happened twice.
It is weird it's happened twice. Bless him. And I would watch Jared Harris read the phone book, which is the other funny thing for me. I'm just like, I could literally watch him do anything, but especially, I guess, watch him try and scream the truth at people and hit a wall.
Guys, John Barrow.
Okay,
Let me wrap up on John Barrow.
The reason we're off topic is because now I don't know who John Barrow is.
We haven't met him yet.
Talking about
we
him.
haven't met him.
Why?
Because he's important for why the Franklin expedition happens. And too often Franklin, I I think Franklin was too often maligned for how badly the expedition went. But the expedition, all the planning, all of it was decided by Barrow. And it was done in 6 months. And he was the man with the plan and the marching orders. And you didn't say no to Barrow's marching orders. If he gave you your instructions, you followed them to a T. And Franklin was a career naval man who followed instructions to a T. Now I've got to skip ahead in my notes, see where I'm at. All right, so...
Well, okay, but Franklin, where's Franklin? Who's that?
Franklin is the older black-haired gentleman who is insistent that they continue. That's Franklin.
Yes, in the show.
He is the lead captain of the entire expedition.
I thought his name was John.
Yes, Sir John Franklin. You're right.
Who's John Ross?
John. Oh my God, this is going to be like, who's on first? Okay, John.
And after 20 minutes, they finally talked about the show.
Oh, no. Okay, all right. Okay, hang on. John Ross was uncle to James Clark Ross. James Clark Ross was friends with Francis Crozier, and they had just been in the Antarctic together.
Crozier is Jared Harris,
who has been in everything.
I think I just don't have a face in my head for Franklin. Like, which actor in this show is Franklin? I think I just need a picture.
Okay, hang on.
Oh my God, Nella is the host of this Zoom, so she can literally share her screen.
We're doing this live, and I'm like, I literally.
It's okay. We can cut it. We can cut it in post. It's fine. Everything's fine.
Or I'm like the character that every author writes into a book, who knows nothing about the world, so that the reader can learn about the world through that person. That is me. Okay. Like, I swear there are other people who watch this show and are like, I don't know who.
All right.
Who's Franklin?
Do you see him? That's Franklin. That's the guy who plays Franklin.
Oh. This whole time when you were saying John Ross, I thought that was John Ross.
No, that is Franklin. Franklin is played by, I should really have had the cast list up, ready to go. This is on me.
Yeah, I mean, while you're on that page, you could do a quick, like, The Terror Stars and is directed by, if you'd like. Okay. Because I should have done that.
See, I know who Jared Harris is. I know Tobias something is the... Now I don't know who John Ross is.
From the top. I will get to James Clark Ross and John Ross. We will get there. The only people you need to worry yourself about are Jared Harris, who is playing Captain Francis Crozier, who is
I know who that is.
In command of the Terror. Then you have Tobias Menez playing Commander James Fitzjames, who is the executive officer of the Erebus.
Yep.
Or the captain of the Erebus. And then you have Kieran Hines, who is playing Sir John Franklin, who is the commanding officer. His ship is the Erebus. He's the expedition leader. He's the guy who just looks, he keeps putting on a jolly face.
Yeah, and he like made the speech at the end of it.
Yeah. And he's like, he just feels soft and gentle. And that makes sense because Franklin was described as the man who wouldn't hurt a fly. Like there's stories of him being like, there was a fly in his sleeve and he was like, I'm not going to bother the fly. There's room enough in this world for the both of us. He was a pacifist. He was incredibly religious. You know, people often mocked him for like being like the petticoats in his life were controlling him because his wife and his niece were very pushy, but like he loved them dearly, you know, and he was very much a people pleaser. Like the writing we have from the expedition before they disappeared and in the letters they sent back from Greenland is that, for example, Commander Fitzjames was delighted with Franklin. He wrote, "We are very happy and very fond of Sir John Franklin. He improves very much the more we come to know of him. He is anything but nervous and fidgety. In fact, I should say remarkable for energetic decision in sudden emergencies." Even the junior officers wrote, "I never felt the captain was so much my companion with anyone I have ever sailed with before." He was a man who wanted to be everyone's friend. He wanted to like guide them. He didn't want to like cause a scene. I can only imagine how much he must have hated any time discipline needed to happen where you had to whip somebody, which was, you know, par for the course within the British Navy. The sense you get is just, you know, he just doesn't, he wants to do his duty. He wants to get the recognition he feels is deserved him. But he was also, his background was that of not really of a of a wartime commander. He was like sent to Australia to map out the coastline. He was interested in science and art and things like that. And he was looking for his last chance to get off of half pay and to get the honor that he felt had been taken from him when he left Van Diemen's Land in disgrace.
Yeah.
And that's Franklin. And that's played by Kieran Hines. And now we've lost Joy. So now that we've touched on Franklin again, we really talked about him in the previous episode. And remember, Franklin was not Barrow's first, second, or third choice for this expedition. Barrow had originally looked at either Perry or James Clark Ross, who had just come off a successful Antarctica expedition with Crozier. But James Clark Ross comes back, he gets married, and he's like, no, my wife says no more polar exploration for me, thanks. Crozier, and let's touch on Francis Radon Moira Crozier for a second.
What a name!
Played by guy who's in everything.
Guys, by our beloved Jared Harris. He wasn't even up for consideration to lead this, and mostly because he was Irish and common. And I'm not talking he was Catholic Irish. He was Presbyterian Irish, and that wasn't good enough. Yeah.
Which is still weird to me.
Yes.
So is that
so
part of why Fitzjames is kind of like constantly undercutting him in the show, or is that something else?
I think it's because Crozier, everyone noticed what a bad attitude he had at the beginning of the expedition.
Right, yeah.
So reading the book Ice Blink, it notes that even common seamen saw Crozier was not a real toff, but the crew, most English officers, and Barrow understood that Crozier was what they call a blue water man. He was good at his job. Even though he was the wrong country, he was Irish, and he was coarse, and he was supposedly ill at ease in society, and he had to educate himself because he had been at sea continuously since the age of 13. And he didn't come from a background where he had private tutors or anything like that. Everything he learned at sea.
Yeah, he learned on the job.
Yeah. But he was described as that there were few officers on quarterdeck that were his equal. And he had already at this time sailed into the Arctic 3 times with Perry, who was the guy who grew watercress to fight off scurvy. He fed watercress to his men that he grew on the pipes of the ship.
Wait, that's awesome.
I know. I love him. I'm like, I would have done that. I would have brought seeds to the Arctic and fed my men watercress. And then he had also gone on a 4th polar expedition, but this time to the Antarctic with his friend, James Clark Ross. And James Clark Ross was all the right things. He was British. He was handsome. He was witty. And he was the second command of that. And in that expedition, he was the captain of the Terror, and his friend James Clark Ross, who is the very attractive man at the very beginning of this episode, who is in the tent with the Inuit man asking, well, who was it? Was it
Oh, okay. So I was going to say, have we met Ross yet? Ross.
That was Ross.
Okay.
Not the guy who could speak Inuit, the other guy. Yeah, the other guy. They come back from their trip to the Antarctic. They actually spend time in Van Diemen's Land, and that's where Crozier meets Franklin's niece, Sophia, falls in love with her, asks her to marry him, and she tells him no. She actually has a crush on his friend, James Clark Ross.
How could you not?
I mean, he's very pretty. But James Clark Ross marries someone else instead. And as we gear up for this, what is to become the Franklin expedition, Crozier is not even considered a commander for it, but Barrow sees him as insurance because Crozier has the Arctic experience Barrow needs for this expedition. He needs someone who has the clout, and that's Franklin, because of the work his wife, Lady Jane, had done to drum him up and for how hard he campaigned for it to convince everyone, you want to send my husband. He is the one who should be finding the Northwest Passage. He could do it. So they send, as the captain of the other ship, once again, the Terror, Crozier. And as the book Ice Blink points out, Crozier was not stupid. He knew that once again he would be covering an Englishman's ass. And the description of him leading up to the expedition is that he was pessimistic, he was depressed, he was disinterested in everything happening around him. Allegedly,
so that is consistent.
Yeah. Allegedly, he told a fellow officer he didn't expect to return from this.
Wow.
Which, okay. Someone described him as melancholy an Irishman as I ever saw. Even down to one of the last letters he sent home, he wrote to his friend James Clark Ross and said, "In truth, I am sadly lonely, and when I look back at the last voyage, I can see the cause and therefore no prospect of having a more joyous feeling." He was depressed, and, he very well could have been suffering from a kind of, polar fatigue. He had just come off Antarctica. Like, this was his 5th time going into the Arctic, into these
Well, and
these
also
sort of
not really
conditions.
going with anybody that he genuinely enjoyed the company of, too.
But then also, not even that, it's just like, once again, like, he's not... Everyone else came back from the Antarctic. Like, James Clark Ross was knighted for the Antarctic. He was put on half pay.
Yeah, this
half
is the
pay
other
was
problem.
what happened when you weren't on a ship. He wasn't given any kind of recognition for the work he had done so far because he was common and he was Irish and he was Presbyterian. And it wasn't
that's
good
the
enough.
theater scene.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's the theater scene.
Yeah.
That's also the, that's also why he doesn't stand up right away, because ultimately it's like no one's giving him recognition,
And also, he's not comfortable with it. Like give the man, like, a title or something, but don't expect him to, like, be fun at parties. He's not that kind of guy. I was curious if, Crozier did suffer from alcoholism. And there is some discussion of how, as they're leading up to shipping out, he checked out of everything, and that there was kind of this this understanding that he was drinking pretty hard, and the whole business of sorting out the packing of the ships and everything seemed to fall on one of his, his secretary, Mr. Helpman. And it just sort of seems like before they shipped out, he was just working on pulling himself together to, like...
Yeah.
And, like, he did have some say in the crew that he brought on board. He was the one that picked Mr. Blanky, the ice master.
Yes.
He's the one that's at the top of the mast with him, looking at the ice pack to decide how bad it is.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
Blanky.
I remember the part in the show where they're like, "Wake Mr. Blanky," and I was like, well, that's an unfortunate name. But
I, too, had that reaction as well.
Yeah. He also sniped. So in the Antarctic expedition, the cook that he ended up taking over to the Terror for this one was the cook on the Erebus, and he was such a good cook, Mr. Diggle, that he was like, "I'm going to grab you for my ship because you can work miracles with the food we have. So you're coming with me."
yeah.
But other than that, like, a lot of the chaos of packing up these ships in a record time, fell to other people than him. He was checked out, and supposedly he was drinking pretty hard. And even to the point where his fellow officers of the Terror wrote, "Look at the state of our commander's ship. Everything's in confusion." So that's Crozier before we leave.
I mean,
yeah.
Well, like, one thing I'm currently appreciating, which is like a tiny bit off topic, but I feel like I'm going to forget to say it if I don't say it here, is that you mentioned last time that part of the reason this is such a meaty show is that the writers have put in all of these, like, almost like historical Easter eggs, for lack of a better way to explain it.
Yes, exactly.
And it's funny because, like, literally every single thing that you have said so far, I'm remembering a moment of the show where they pointed at it. Like, they literally show Guy Who's in Everything, like, pouring himself a giant glass of some alcoholic beverage, right?
Yeah.
Like, right before they flash to the theater scene. So they do that. And, like, there is actually a little exchange where they're talking about the food that's served on the Erebus.
Yeah.
And how that's what Sir John prefers.
Yeah.
Like, they really stuck that in there. I love it.
Yeah, no, I love that,
It's in there. It's in the show.
There's a few other archaeological tidbits they left in there also, which we'll get to. We have to start talking about the episode, though.
I know, because I haven't even got to Fitzjames yet, but let me know when I can talk about Fitzjames.
No, we can talk about Fitzjames as we get to him, because I find Fitzjames fascinating, but having seen the season already, I'm trying not to spoil too much about Fitzjames, because there's something about him that I find really endearing, but also really heartbreaking, and I can't quite put my finger on it. Like, so.
I mean, I'm excited to explore that because thus far, Fitzjames is just kind of a jerk, you know?
Right? He comes across that way, doesn't he?
Tells some boring stories, womp womp, you know, like hates on someone else.
Tell us about Birdshit Island, James. That's a capital story.
It's a capital story. I wonder if we're going to hear about how the Chinese shot him. Oh, there it is. The Chinese have shot him.
And there it is. We are, in fact, telling the boring story we've all heard millions of times before because we're trapped on a ship together in the Arctic.
We're not even on the same ship. Fitzjames is over on the Erebus and he has to like host them for dinner.
These endless officer dinners.
I just love
this is what he asked for.
I love the idea that Crozier only sees Fitzjames for these officer dinners, and I imagine that these are the stories he tells every single time because he just tells it every single time because what else are you going to tell on a ship? And these are his two best stories.
Yep.
You see, this is why we need to watch Master and Commander because it makes me think of the scene where they're having their officer dinner, and one of the guys is like, "Captain, can we interest you in telling us an amusing anecdote?" And it's just like you can see Russell Crowe's character being like, well, I guess I'll tell the fucking story about Nelson again because like that's the only fucking story I have. You know? And I do feel like, yeah, I'm going to talk about Fitzjames. I'm going to do it. I'm doing it because the thing about Fitzjames is that he was straight up called the most handsome man in the Navy, and he was everything Crozier was not. He was young, he was 33, he was well educated, he was Church of England, he was fast rising in the service. He was described in the book Iceblink as thumpingly, lispingly English to the core.
Thumpingly, lispingly?
Yes. Yes. All right, I'm going to give you bullet points of like the biggest stories of Fitzjames' life and why he was the hot jock. So,
okay.
So he's in the Middle East. They're going to test out these steamers on the river Euphrates and Tigris. But while they're getting ready for that, a man falls overboard. And before anyone blinks, he's jumped overboard to save the man from drowning because they can't get a boat on the water fast enough. So everyone's like, Fitzjames saves the day. Then he was on one of the first Royal Navy steamships to ascend the Euphrates, which was also named the Euphrates. And it was a miserable fucking journey, by the way. They had to go 500 miles up fucking river against the current. And then when they couldn't go any further, he personally walked and traveled 1,200 miles through Iraq and Syria to deliver mail for the Navy. Mm-hmm. Because he was just like, I got two legs, let me go use them. I am in the Navy. So then he distinguished himself in the Opium Wars, because that's what you do in the 1830s. So you get the sense of Fitzjames as he's like very charming, and he makes himself very useful. He is, for example, very close with Sir Barrow's family because he saved Sir Barrow's son from an embarrassment, whatever that means.
Ugh.
I would love to know what that means. I mean, this was like John Barrow's son was his friend, but it's also he saved him from an embarrassment. And I'm like, what did John Barrow's son do, Jimmy? What did he do?
What was it?
Seriously.
Where are the bodies buried? Tell us. Tell us.
No, more like what Molly house did you find him in and you had to drag him out? What was it? There's so many more things it could be than murder that would be super embarrassing.
No, I mean like dragged out, you know, like you wake up in a drunken or drugged stupor and you're next to a dead body. You know, like that's what I'm imagining. Just dragging someone out of a bar or a drug den or whatever it is. Like that's whatever. That's all that.
Is it weird that I just went like, I'm sure there was a brothel involved and like.
See, I'm imagining more Jane Austen where it's just like, and then she ran off with Wickham. Oh no! And then Fitzjames swoops in like the Darcy
useless one. Yeah, exactly. Oh no, the utterly useless one who thinks he knows what's going on, but he really doesn't.
Yeah. Anyway, so he had endeared himself to Barrow's family, and that's why Sir John always was trying to promote him. And that's one of the reasons why Sir John Barrow put him on this expedition was because of his connection to the family, but also because Fitzjames was a young up-and-coming naval officer who really loved steam. He thought it was great and he had experience with it because of his travels on the HMS Euphrates. He wasn't frightened by it. He was like, no, this is the future of the Navy. And that's what Barrow needed for this, because they had retrofitted the ships Terror and Erebus with steam engines, which I'll get to. But let's first talk about the rest of the people.
No, I like that about Fitzjames. I like that he's, but it also reads into how he's kind of like an upstart and wouldn't necessarily, would look at Crozier and be like, what a stick in the mud,
Yeah. And that's why it's such this is a really good trifecta, for a writer. You have Franklin. He has
stiff upper lip.
He does the job given to him, but he is well-meaning. He likes his men. He tries to be fair, and he's looking for glory. But he was looking for glory in a way that will bring honor and prestige to the people who have sent him on this mission, right?
Right.
So that's the guy you want, like, as your forward-facing.
Everyone who works with / for him.
Yes.
Right? Like, they idolize him. They want to impress him.
And then you have the young guy who is up on the latest technology, who isn't afraid of it, and who has the energy and gumption and the sexiness to get it done, right? Handsomest man in the Navy.
I cannot see this actor that way, but this is just one of those moments where I'm just...
But I love that cut jaws. I think he's got a beautiful face. I think they cast him very well, which looks nothing like may I say, looks nothing like the real life Fitzjames at all.
This is a real Gallivant moment, right? Like, I'm going to choose to accept that this man is attractive.
I'm going to send you a photo of the real Fitzjames, and I'm going to see, all right, no, which one is it, Danielle? Is it neither? Is it one or the either? You tell me.
But then you have Crozier, who's just done.
No, Crozier is done, but Crozier is the insurance that you're not going to die on the ice, because...
Like the begrudging expert.
Yeah. And
the I'm too old for this, insert word I can't say.
Precisely. And at 49, he was too old. He was done. He was done with this swear job. But the other thing is and they say it in the show, only 4 of us have expertise in the Arctic. You, Sir Franklin, me, Reed, who is an ice master, and Blanky, who is an ice master. That's it. These are the 4 guys who have been here before. Because
and it's not
very often, and that's the thing.
Not Fitzjames.
It was impossible to get somebody who had been on an Arctic expedition in the officer class to sign up again for it. You had to be a mad lad to do it more than once.
And this guy, you said, did it 5 times?
Yes.
Wild. And why? Unclear. Still unclear to me. What is he doing here? I guess he just wanted to make sure everyone got
Get
home,
off a half pay? I don't know. I got nothing else to live for. I guess I'll go back to the Arctic. Baffling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's something to be said about depression and how it affects one's actions. I think maybe he was just genuinely like, I got nothing else going on right now. The woman I want to marry doesn't seem terribly interested, and I mean, I do know this. I know this back to front usually. So we have this episode. We open in the future.
We open with the first expedition to try to find the Franklin expedition. And they're in an Inuit hut, and they are trying to determine what happened. They're asking questions. They have photographs of the 3 commanders, of the 3 captains. We find out that the man that they're speaking to had met a Gluka, which he points out as being Crozier, and that Crozier left the parting words of, don't follow us. If you've come here, go back home, pretty much.
Yeah. We also find out in that first scene, like, pretty quickly, like, oh, if you didn't know this was a show with a supernatural element, now you know it's a show with a supernatural element.
Well, with Toonbach following them, made of muscle and spells sent by the shamans.
So good. So good. What a great tease. And then we go back in time and we get all of the setup, which I don't think we need to run through like play by play, because we've basically done it here. Yeah. Like what I'm hearing is having not read the book and having only seen this episode of the show, it's incredibly true to the text.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, yeah, like, of the things we know about the Franklin expedition, based on the few pieces of writing from them we know that they stayed overwintered at Beechy Island. We know that they buried 3 men there. We know that they headed north until they couldn't go any further. And then they headed back down south, and they made great time, supposedly, because by the time they got stuck in ice, they were very far from Beechy Island. Based on records of that period, we know that they had a particularly mild summer while they were making that push. So they probably were feeling pretty confident that they could make it and they could push through it. The problem is that they get stuck in ice, and then that ice becomes 2 winters worth of ice for them, because that really good summer becomes a really bad summer. Because not only does it become a colder one, but they get caught in the Beaufort Sea ice stream. They're pretty much in the Arctic archipelago. And they were in a particular spot of it where all that pack ice from the north gets shuttled down a chute of the Beaufort Sea, and it just gets shoved and shoved and shoved. It is a dangerous spot to be in. And that's where they ended up. And they had no way of knowing. All they knew was that winter could come to the Arctic. Once you're in September, you're already done.
At any time, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, some would say they had no way of knowing, but there were 4 people on that ship who were very clear about the correct decision to make.
We, in fiction, have decided knew what the right decision to make was. And that's one of the fun things about unpacking this, right? We don't know the discussions that were had on the ships. We don't know.
That's fair. Like, we don't know if Crozier was like, we could probably make it. Like, we don't know.
Yeah. We don't know.
We don't actually know that. But fictionally speaking, they have set up this beautiful backdrop of, because we find the ship right after, well, in fiction, it's right after Beechy, even though, if I'm not mistaken, the sailor who passes away.
Oh, that's a homage to Beechy, 100%. Yes,
that's a homage to the bodies that are found on Beechy Island, which, by the way, listeners, if you want to do a quick Google, the bodies there are kind of fascinating, just with the way they were so well preserved, because they were in such cold. When people found them, I find them fascinating anyway. I don't know. I guess if you have a thing about that, don't look them up.
Yeah. It works really well narratively, TV-wise, that they're just coming out of that, though, because that optimism is like the root of their hubris.
Exactly.
Right? Like, that optimism is what causes them to think, like, oh, we're like right around the corner from whatever location, which is 200 miles from wherever we want to be. We can do it. We can do it. Look at all this, look at all the distance we were able to accomplish, not whatever number of months ago.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's, on one hand, you could say it's hubris, but we also have to remember that in the first winter, they lost 3 men. That didn't happen. When you look at other Arctic exploration, people did die on them, but not in the first winter. Not 2 guys within a couple of days of each other, and then another guy on another ship 90 days after. Like, it must have unsettled them to lose 3 men that quickly. When things should have been.
We do know that they died of tuberculosis, right?
Yes. So because of the excavations that were done in the 80s, we do know that they had been sick. They were very underweight when they were buried, and that they died of tuberculosis and the secondary infections that happened with that, which probably pneumonia. They were sick, and because they were sick, they got sicker and they died. Is pretty much what happened. Well,
this is a nice segue into the one aspect of this episode that we have not discussed.
Yes.
And that is poor David.
Poor David.
Poor David. We'll call him the B plot, which seems unkind.
Yes.
But,
well,
the expedition is named after one of these characters, and it's not David.
I think this is a great way to bring in the Beechy deaths and the sort of impending doom and the horror of that they're setting up for this. Through
the TB deaths.
Yes. Well, just in the show, the sort of fictional horror, suspense, terror that is happening in the ship. You know, men had to be medically examined to be cleared for duty in the Discovery Service. However, from what we know, and Davy is 100% based on the first man who was excavated at Beachy, John Torrington. The actor looks like him. He is buried in the same blue striped shirt.
Yeah, we know that because of that aerial shot of the coffin is essentially how we find him. We essentially find that in the archaeological dig of where that body was found, almost like position for position, exactly what that is.
Yeah. And then when you look at how David dies in the show, John Torrington, what we know is that he had probably been suffering from consumption. And one of the cures for consumption was, well, go join the Navy and go to sea.
Yeah.
Except he joins as a stoker. So he's in the bow of the ship with the coal dust, feeding the coal into the engine. And very quickly he gets ill.
Yeah.
The sickness takes him pretty quickly. And then Hartnell dies a couple of days after Torrington. And they actually, from what I have read, did an autopsy on him.
Mm-hmm.
They put the chest plate on upside down, but they autopsied him on the ship to try to determine what was wrong. What we have found is that he probably also died of complications from tuberculosis and the secondary infections that happened because of that.
Right. So, the thing is, all of this tracks, right? I know it's unusual to lose 3 people, but if someone passes the health inspection and then they get on a ship where they're in small spaces with other people and they're harboring a contagious disease, it's going to spread.
It's almost wild, though, how it didn't spread further. Because
that's the wildest part of it.
The third guy who died was on a separate ship. So you have Torrington and you have Hartnell on the same ship, and they die close to each other. But then that's the only people who get sick. Wildly.
Call it the officers' dinners. Who knows? But
well, these were able seamen and stokers.
Yeah.
They were not in officers' territory, on the ship.
Yeah. At any rate, I kind of like the way the show plays it because there's some level of quote horror that just comes with contagious disease.
Yes.
Right? So it's a little bit that, but there is also the supernatural element that we get as David is dying.
Yes. Yeah, because again, this is a fictionalized account of it. And I like how the show tries to introduce the idea of you are stepping into something you have no knowledge of and are not prepared for. And you have this vision of a shaman telling them to run.
Yeah.
And of course, we're not here to do that. We're here to find the Northwest Passage. So we bury our boy.
And the one person who sees the warning passes it on to a lowly assistant, ? I don't know what that person's rank actually is. And then dies. Dies of shock and fear, presumably.
Yeah. So the one who is present for this scene and who is unsettled deeply by it is Mr. Harry Goodsir, who was the acting assistant surgeon of Eberus. He was not a doctor. He was a surgeon and an anatomist. And this is important in the 19th century because among medical practitioners, you had apothecaries, surgeons, and physicians. And apothecaries could prescribe medicines, but they didn't usually physically treat patients. Surgeons learned on the job for how to cut people open and in a way that hopefully wouldn't kill them.
And then hope, ideally
crossed.
put them back together, but, only sometimes.
What's the upside down breastplate between friends?
Exactly.
But I like how the book deals with that, and explains that away, where it's just because the sick room is pretty much a screen between the men who are in tight quarters in their hammocks, and they're trying to do an autopsy while the men are upset that this guy just died, and they're upset that, and now you're cutting him open. Goodsir actually gets so nervous from the pressure of having to try to figure out what killed him and do this as quickly as possible that he flips it accidentally. He doesn't mean to. He's very well-meaning, but it's the pressure of being in a dark enclosed space and feeling the pressure of 60 other men upset that you're daring to defile their friend's body, and he panics and he does it wrong. Which the show, instead of doing that, does it through Davy's ring. Davy, he has one thing of any worth. It's a ring that's gold plated, but it might fetch something, and he really wants it to go back to his sister. And Good Sir promises, I will give it to your sister. He tries to comfort him. You know, I'm going to talk about Good Sir and the Victorian good death later on, but Good Sir is just trying to be that decent Victorian, educated Christian type of person.
And if someone is going to go, they might as well go peacefully.
Yes.
Right?
And
no matter what
ideal.
you have to say to them.
To go peacefully, undisturbed by your pain, knowing you were going to God was the ideal in Victorian death. And he's trying to reassure him of this. And it's very sweet. It's well-meaning. It's foolish. It's sweet. But of course...
It would have worked if it worked for the shaman.
Also,
he was trying to warn you.
If I'm not mistaken, that warning comes just as they identify the pack ice. Am I wrong about that?
Just as they... Oh, yeah.
Because so I know when the autopsy happens, they also are freeing the ice from the rudder, which is a beautiful piece of cinematography.
Back and forth.
It's a beautiful piece of cinematography, and it's so good.
Yeah.
There is also another reference when he sees the shaman that people are seeing something on the deck of the ship. And I apologize, listeners. I watched it 2 days ago, and apparently my memory is shoddy. But I could have sworn that's when they were like, get Blanky to look at the...
Yeah, no, that's when they start, don't you hear that? Go get the looking glass. And they look and go get the ice master, and that's where they determine that's pack ice ahead. That's old ice. We are coming into the pack.
Yeah, and I love that idea of like you are not only entering into a, you know, and again, in this fictional world of like you are entering into a space that you are not welcome, and not only are you not welcome, you think you know, but you know absolutely nothing about, and even the people who are here are just like, no, you will not make it. And, you will die.
Like Joy, to be clear, the space is making it clear to them that they are not welcome.
Exactly.
You know?
There are so many signs.
Saying, do not continue. Do not continue.
Yeah.
And yet.
And I love that we have both this, like, poor Davy dying and, you know, Good Sir trying to do the autopsy and make sure it's nothing, you know, that they have to concern themselves with. But also he himself is very concerned because he has not experienced a death like that, one would think, you know.
It's also that Davy, or I'd written David in my notes, but I don't think it's actually Davy. Know which one it is. So if I had said David earlier, I'm sorry, listeners.
I feel like it was Davy Young, but it's just a nickname for him.
Whatever his name is.
David Young, or David.
Let's call him Young.
Yeah.
Because we do agree on that. That not being autopsied was technically one of his 3 dying wishes.
Yeah.
But he did say if Sir John wants it.
Yeah, if
Sir
it's
John
ordered.
The viewer, did not see Sir John order that.
No, it was Stanley. It was Stanley, the other doctor.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it was literally the other doctor who I'm sure outranks the anatomist.
Oh,
so, 100%.
Like very clearly.
Yeah. So it becomes
don't autopsy, give my ring to my sister, and don't tell Sir John that I was scared.
I know.
Right? Like 2 very simple tasks, I think.
Yeah. The way he died, everyone knew he died poorly.
Yeah.
Right down to Franklin reporting in with Crozier of, oh yes, and we'll bury your man. And Crozier's like, what? And he's like, yes, he died in the night. It was a blessing. Everyone woke up at Davy's screams, like at Young's screams.
Yeah. And we get that. And we have that cinematography moment of, like you said, these sailors who are right outside who can hear him screaming, run. And it's just like, yeah, okay, cool. I really like the way this show, and we'll see this in later episodes. I don't want to harp on it too much here, but I really like the way this show lets the thriller horror aspect of it just really slowly grow. It's one of the few horror TV shows, I think, that really genuinely just lets things happen in an order, and like each episode just builds on everything else that came before it really well. There's something about letting it breathe, you know, like letting the cinematography do stuff, like looking out at the moisture that's around the sun that they're starting to see for winter and being like, oh, there's another sign. And like, oh, nope, that's pack ice. Oh, nope, you've got like some ice stuck in your rudder. Like maybe we should fix that and like, go.
Can we discuss that scene?
Yes, let's talk about that. So they dress up a dude and in that typical diver's. Is it? I almost said uniform.
It's a diving suit.
Yeah,
a diving suit.
He's literally got like a weight, like a giant weight strapped to his chest. I'm like, that diving suit alone weighs over 100 pounds. Did we need the weight? I guess so.
The boots would have been weighted as well on that thing.
Well, he does survive his little ordeal, but earlier, we didn't really talk about this, but earlier when the piece of ice gets stuck in the rudder, the whole ship shakes and someone from the crow's nest ends up falling, smacking his back on the side of the boat and then tumbling into the water.
Somehow is able to swim for like 3 minutes after that. Makes absolutely no sense.
I know, and that was dramatic effect.
Yeah.
He would not have come back up to the surface. Poor, bless him. He tried.
Then don't show me him whacking his back on the side of the ship.
I know. Well, but even that coupled with how cold, genuinely cold that water is, like you have 20 seconds, maybe tops. And then he like broke his spine on the way
water.
down.
He would have hit one.
Exactly. But so this happens and the ice is stuck in the rudder and they cannot move. And at first, this is one of what we were referencing before where they were talking about, let's just go for broke and head back further south instead of continuing. Just take the crew from your ship, put it on our ship and just go. And it's like, no, we're going to fix our ship and we're going to continue forward.
But they can't even fix the ship. They're just going to push forward.
Well,
and they're slower now.
So then they send the guy in the...
No. Okay. They send Mr. Collins, who is the second master. They send him below. So no, he's great.
Me too.
They send him below so that he can hopefully
unjam the propeller.
But when he comes back up, he determines that the propeller is bent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. He tries.
And so that means that Erebus is now slower.
Yeah.
So because it is damaged and they do not have a dry dock necessary to fix it, Franklin is the one who suggests, well, the Terror will go ahead of us and we're just going to push. We're going to push for the passage. It's within our sights, gentlemen. We can do it.
Right.
Crozier is the one.
While he's down there, he sees the poor man who fell overboard and floating. It's awful.
And it's so creepy. It's so creepy because it's just like, why it's cold. Why he wouldn't sink. He's just floating in the cold water.
Yeah. And just like
under the ice.
Zooming outside of that, like what you were saying earlier, Joy, there are so many good horror elements that are happening, like just in this one scene, because you've got the diver who's being lowered into the water in his swing. And for like anyone who's ever been in the deep ocean, when you look around and you can see nothing but depth and blackness around you, it is scary.
Yeah.
It is really, really scary. So he sees that, and also he's in freezing water with a weight tied to his chest. He's got to unjam the propeller. Some part of me is like, he's going to get an arm stuck in there. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, but something bad is going to happen.
Or he's going to shift and fall off his little swing, right? Like,
and then down he goes. Yeah. He's got like 2 tugs for when there's a kink. He's going to suffocate. Like, literally anything could happen, right? So that's happening. And then that's being intercut with the autopsy. With David's autopsy, you can literally hear the saw going through his chest plate. Like,
yeah.
You know, they're pulling out the liver. It's not, it's not cirrhotic. It's not this thing. And so those 2 things are all happening at the same time. And it's fantastic.
Yeah. No, the cinematography in these moments are great because you get to have that juxtaposition of the saw cracking open this poor sailor who just like, also his death is very gruesome. I guess here, like maybe we'll have like a heads up, everyone. We're talking about the Terror. And I know we've talked about Fringe before, but this is This is different. This is a different
kind
of
horror. It's got some good body horror. And it's got some good body horror in The Terror. And if you're not into that, then it's not a show for you.
And also, like, some of the horror does kind of come out of nowhere. For example, this poor sailor dies by literally being in the middle of a conversation, and then suddenly he's coughing up blood. And not just coughing up blood, he is spewing blood on a table. So, it's really not subtle, is I think what I'm trying to say. But it's not as cartoonish as Fringe. It is much more, I don't want to say realistic, because I know we're getting into supernatural elements and those are slightly different. But it's got a much more visceral, much more like almost relatable horror than I would say something in Fringe did. It's not cartoony, your flesh is coming off your bones. It's way more like, oh, someone could actually die like that. Like, okay, cool. Cool. You know?
You just wait till we get to the scurvy. You're going to hate it.
Just you wait. Fun times. But I highly recommend the show. Just, you know, again, if you like horror, we're kind of getting back to our quote unquote horror roots. I know we started with Almost Human, but like we're getting back to that, like, okay, this is creepy and weird, you know, which I genuinely enjoy. I know I wanted to talk about the cinematography thing. I know we have the dinner party where we kind of touch on it a little bit, where it's not actually the dinner party. Sorry. It's after the dinner party where it's like, okay, guys, let's talk about pack ice. We are seeing pack ice. That is pack ice out there. We're getting colder readings than we were before. Like, this is happening. And Crozier is leading the charge with Blanky next to him being like, yes, this is the thing we should do. And Sir John is the deciding factor. And he says no.
The thing is, and again, like, as you said before, Nella, I know this is all fiction, and so it's all for dramatic effect, right? But the thing is, he's not even suggesting necessarily that they turn around and go home. He's suggesting that they take a break. That they overwinter in safety.
No, that's true.
That
so it's like if he was suggesting if he was suggesting that, like, you know, let's cut our losses, let's just give up and go home, I'd be like, wait a minute, but we've come all this way, right?
Yeah, that's
like,
fair.
What he proposes in the narrative of the show just sounds so reasonable. He's like, hey, like, what if? It's September. September's the 9th month of the year. We're nearing winter, right? Like, what if we went this way and found this this probably safer little harbor? Maybe it's an island. Maybe we end up somewhere even better. But if it's not, we end up in this safe little harbor, right? We can overwinter there. We can hang out. And then we'll double back when it's warm and resume the journey.
The debate,
you know, that's all he wants.
Yeah. The debate over, is King William's land or is it an island? Was a very real question. And in the book, The Terror, when they're having this discussion, Crozier gets called out on it. So you follow the theories of Dr. Robert, I think his name's Robert Hall in the book, but he was a real Arctic explorer who was gung-ho about, no, I think this is an island and this is a peninsula and this is another island, and just give me the money, the Navy, to go explore it. And they wouldn't give him the money, and he kept trying to do it on his own and like failing miserably at it. I do like how the show and the book follows. They're sailing into this blind because we are in the about 300 nautical miles of unknown, unmapped territory to white men. Mm-hmm. And this is an archipelago. And it's an archipelago that very quickly, very dangerously can get filled with ice. So a way that could be clear otherwise suddenly is no longer clear. So you're moving in one direction, you're trying to back up, and suddenly there's ice behind you. There's no way of knowing. I enjoy this debate. And yeah, of course, we can all sit and be like, Crozier was right, you should have overwintered, blah, blah, blah.
We don't know.
But we don't know. We don't know how the debate went on the ship. We don't know what was decided.
But what a reasonable ask.
Yes.
What a reasonable ask. And I like that the show sets this up. And again, full disclosure of the fictionality of it. But if one character was going to set this up, it would be Crozier. You know, you could have easily just had Blinky say this and have all of them just dismiss him.
You could have made it the officers versus the ice masters, right?
Right.
Easily. You could have made it a class issue. I mean, technically it is still a class issue because Crozier is the common Irishman, who's the Presbyterian. Can't get over that Presbyterian wasn't good enough. Like, I was like, well, at least he wasn't Catholic. Oh,
as someone who basically considers herself sort of a non-Christian, the sifting of levels of Christianity is always so alien to me that I'm just like, but you're all playing in the same sand, like you all have the same sand. It's all the same sand. Some of you are building sand castles and some of you are building moats, but that's fine. It's the same sand.
My wife, everyone, trying to solve the entire Catholic Protestant schism with her Tenricchio Jewish self. I love her. This is why I married her.
It's true. I have no frame of reference for why Christians hate other Christians. I have literally no.
Well, okay, that's a whole nother podcast, right? Because I can really get into it if you really want.
Other podcasts, different podcasts.
Different podcasts. That's not what we're here to talk about.
Going back to this podcast, Fitzjames is a real jerk. And he calls Francis melodramatic, and the whole thing
Oh my god, he calls him a Lushington. He's melodramatic. He sasses about, is your friend write melodramas as well? By the way, that This Place Wants Us Dead was from Sophia. It wasn't even a he, it was Sophia, by the way.
I love that line.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite things. I also I love again, Jared Harris plays this role so well of like the person who knows all the things and no one is going to believe him. And then he's going to be stuck with all the rest of these people and also die. Like,
yeah. Can I just call out the closing shot of we have the cut of Franklin makes a decision. We're going to go for broke. We're going to go through the ice. Fade to dark.
And 11 days later?
6 days later. No,
yeah,
6 days, 9 days later. They are trying to dynamite their way out of the ice. They have picks. They have pulleys. They're trying to push.
They're sawing at it.
They're sawing at it. They cannot get through it. And Franklin has to make the call. We are overwintering in the middle of the pack. And I love Kieran for how he plays this. Mm-hmm. The way he draws himself up and goes, cheerful faces. Mm-hmm. Remember, like, we are going to prepare the ships. This is how we're going to do it. Remember, officers, like,
we're prepared for this. This is no big deal.
Yeah, this is what we were sent for, queen and country. And they all turn to go do their jobs. And the way his face changes, because he knows what he's done. And then he looks out to the Terror and, like,
and there's Francis.
And Francis on the ship. The daggers.
It's just, I love that their face falls in the same way, but obviously the subtext is much different. The I told you so on Crozier's face of like the devastation of, I guess we're here now. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Is so good. And and of course, Jared Harris, who at the time, Chernobyl hadn't come out yet. So he perfected it here, I think. And Chernobyl is obviously about many other different things and secrets and lies and things. But
still,
So what you're saying is the Terror got stuck in pack ice, so Chernobyl could melt down, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
For Jared Harris.
There's a title if I ever heard one for a podcast episode. My goodness. I think we desperately need to talk about one more things before we get too bogged down. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. We did miss one other aspect, and whatever, we can go long. We did miss one other aspect, which was I wanted to ask you the differences between the book and this first, because you read the book that The Terror is based on.
I did, because I'm obsessed and I needed to cross off all my exes. So, So in this section, it's pretty note for note.
Okay.
To be honest.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. The book opens not with them looking for Franklin Expedition, but it opens with Crozier, with them being stuck on the ice and them dealing with that.
Okay.
And that's when the book starts going back in time about how we got to this point. But this first episode follows the book pretty closely, where we start deviating is when we meet Lady Silence and her father, and we come into the Toonbach, which will happen in a later episode. But this opening episode, pretty on point with the book. Sets it up pretty nicely. There are just some character changes just in, I think
I feel like they would have cleaned
some
that
choices. Up. Little things at this point that will become big things later on, and I'll get into it then. But
okay.
Generally,
I was just curious if there was I was just curious if there was anything glaring with how the getting stuck happened and the lead up to that. Yeah. That's one other cinematography thing that I really enjoy is the very, very final shot of zooming out from these two ships, and you have the roar of applause from the opera where they were to the silence of the ice. Yes. Of just like, this is what you wanted and this is what you're getting.
I mean, one of the things that anyone who came off of an Arctic expedition spoke of was how much being stuck in a ship over winter felt like being entombed alive. You were in these dark, dark ships. You were trying to conserve fuel and light. And also you're in the Arctic. And once you hit the point where you have no sun for a couple of months and it is dark. And it was like being in a tomb is how it's described. And that really messed with people. I would say a lot of writing has explored how, for the service, scurvy was the biggest fear. The other one, especially in regards to the Antarctic and polar expeditions, was the depression, the nostalgia that would happen because you are trapped and there is nothing to do. Perry, in particular, was the first he brought books. He brought costumes so they could put on plays. He had a newspaper on ship while they overwintered. We know that the Erebus and Terror had books. They had a full library. Sir John, he was so religious, he specifically asked for a number of Bibles for the men. There were classes. You would do your duties, and then starting at 7, you would attend the able seamen, who were otherwise, on the whole, uneducated, attend classes. You want to learn about a thing? Come have classes, and then we'll all go to bed at 10.
Oh, I like that.
There was an attempt.
I know that they're just
trying
to keep busy, but I like that
You're trying to keep busy. You're trying to keep sane. Think about how we all lost our minds during COVID.
I was just going to say,
stuck in our cozy apartments,
surviving a pandemic. I feel a real kinship with these poor people adrift at sea.
You can't go anywhere. You're stuck with everyone around you, and it's too cold to go outside. You don't want to be outside. It's 50 below. You're on the
outside because the outside could literally kill you. And surviving a pandemic for the last 3 years, too real.
Oh, man. Yeah. Everything has been so colored by that. Even when I was talking earlier about, the horror of a contagious disease, that's only been heightened in the last 3 years. I don't think it would have felt that way.
We haven't even gotten to we haven't even gotten to the botulism yet. We're all just talking about, scurvy, and which isn't even.
We're just talking about TB.
And TB.
Sorry. You know what? This will be my one more thing, because I want to ask Nella about this, because she was the one who pointed it out to me. There is a scene when Sir John Franklin is eating his dinner and he takes out a piece of metal and sets it to the side. I wanted to make sure we talked about this.
Okay, I will try to get into this in more detail, but
no, we will be talking about this in later episodes, but that is a reference to.
For now, just let it be known that the Franklin expedition was considered the top of the line in regards to how it was outfitted, the supplies it had. They really thought they were well outfitted for 3 years.
They had rations.
Could survive for 5 if they had to ration. And that's because they had cans. They had cans of food. This was a brand new technology, just come in the early 1800s. And I'll get into it with the supplier of the cans. They were not well made. Back then, there was no automatic way of making cans. You cut a piece of tin, you wrapped it in a circle, and you soldered the ends of that circle, and then you soldered 2 tin bits to it, to the top, and made a little can. So you had to solder the outside and the inside of the can. That solder was made of iron, and they used arsenic in the soldering as well. And if you're rushing and you're not a master of this, you could use more arsenic. You could cause beads in the soldering of the iron so that it would easily break off and enter the food itself. And then you're picking up pieces of metal as you're eating. This was a problem. And archaeologically, they have found cans out in King William's Island that suggest that, Franklin's expedition suffered from a very, very bad supplier of canned goods. And I will 100% get into it because Golder can burn in hell along with Nasir.
These are names we will talk more about, but I desperately needed to touch on it here so that when we talk for another hour and a half about these,
because and the reason they start alluding to it now is because for a long time, one of the more popular theories about why the Franklin expedition failed was because of lead poisoning. When they excavated the bodies of Beechey in the 80s, the bodies had more lead in them than modern people have. That is considered healthy to have in your body. However, they were not using other 19th century people as their control. They were using modern humans who have far less lead in our everything compared to Victorian London.
Because in mid-19th century Victorian London, lead was everywhere.
So when they were testing their nails and things like that, the lead levels were very high. When they went back and tested their hair and the hair closer to that head that was growing out, the hair follicles and the hair closer to the head that had grown out in the 3 months since they had left England, far less lead. So we know in the beginning of their expedition, they actually had less lead than later on. That's not saying lead didn't lead up to a problem as they depended on the canning more and more.
Right.
If you had to say,
if
Nella,
I was a betting man,
Nella, what would you put a little wager, a little sniffer on if you had money to spend? I would say botulism, and I'll get into that later. It's botulism.
Yeah. But so Nella covered my one more thing because I desperately wanted to make sure we talked about the cans.
I'm glad you talked about it. I think it's important. Like, it's funny because I knew all of that because we have had off the pod conversations about this.
Right. And a part of me feels like maybe moving forward with these episodes, it's just like, okay, ask me your questions and I will try to tell you what I know. Because I feel like we barely talked about the episode. We only talked about the history.
No. I think, we're going to find a balance because we always eventually find a balance, especially when we start a new show. We've also never done a show where it's like, this is a historical event that we are, coloring with supernatural elements and packaging it up and showing it to you. Yeah. Like, this is the first show we're talking about like that. So we're once again reinventing the wheel because we're talking about a new show. But
and the other way to bring it back is to keep mentioning why this is in there, right? And why this is important narratively to introduce this early because it's horror, and the best horror, some horror is really fast and really scary, but some horror is really good and slow.
You set up, you have to have the setup and the payoff.
Good and slow.
That actually leads up to my one more thing.
It's the bit of metal, and maybe it's the shaman, or maybe it's this. Maybe it's that. There's something here, and it is big, and it's scary.
Yeah. And that leads up to my one more thing. In this show, I feel like I have a running tally of Chekhov's insert the blanks. And this episode had Chekhov's old wounds in Fitzjames, where he talks about, and then a shot the size of a cherry entered my arm and into my side, and I was like, we're going to regret that by episode 7 and 8. We're going to really regret that
because this comes into play with how much people know about what scurvy do.
Right? and then we didn't even touch on Hickey, Cornelius Hickey.
Oh boy.
Wow.
You know what? Here's the problem with Hickey. He's too much. Hickey is just too much. For those of you who are watching along with the pod, which, by the way, good for you. Please sound off in our comment section on Twitter. Let us know what part you were horrified by.
What did we not get to in our already almost an hour and a half of discussing this show and book and history? Tell us what we missed.
We're gonna have to do some very fancy editing on this episode, I think. But Hickey is also just one of those characters who is just ridiculous. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I look at Hickey.
He doesn't like the dog. We already don't like him.
Yes.
Neptune is a good boy, and we love Neptune, the dog.
Now, see, the dog was going to be my one more thing.
Oh.
Well, no, here we go. Perfect segue.
I'll make it short and sweet because we are very close to that hour and a half. And so the short and sweet is simply, I'm reasonably sure this dog is going to get eaten. Here's hoping I don't have to see it on screen.
Might I add, there's also a cat named Fagin, and
a
be
monkey.
more worried about, spoilers, be more worried about the monkey.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't see a cat, but I did see a monkey. And
the cat
that's
shows
in my
up
notes
later.
As well.
The cat shows up
The cat
later.
shows up
Notes as
later.
well.
The cat's fine. He shows up
Wait,
later.
there's a monkey on this ship?
Oh, did you not see the
Anyway,
monkey?
no. I'm saying that's written in my notes.
Yes.
There's a monkey in this ship?
Side note, that was a gift from Lady Jane to her husband as a, have safe travel, enjoy a monkey, it's cute. And they named it Jacko.
You can eat it later.
No,
I'm
you
going to
don't.
be less devastated by the monkey than
You don't want to eat the monkey. And you'll find out why. Anyway. Spoilers.
I think we learned that lesson too.
Yes.
I think we covered as much as we were able.
Honestly, I think we covered all of it.
I didn't talk about No, I didn't get to talk about tableau vivants, and all you need to know is that they were very popular as the Victorian parlor game, but also you would go to the theater, and what they were you would recreate artworks or historical scenes on stage without moving. You would dress everyone up and stand there and not move and be like, this depicts the thing. But people would also remember that time during COVID where everyone was recreating artwork in their homes with what they had on hand.
No, I do remember.
We all went back to the Victorian parlor game of the tableau vivant. We all did it.
That's why
we
I know
all
what those
lost
are.
our minds and became Victorians.
Can I just say
confidence? Yes.
Can I just say, as a person who has watched a lot of movies and television where they depict like fifth graders doing reenactments of historical stuff, this is how I imagined it. Like, this is,
yes.
You're today in school, you are going to be Crozier on the ship that goes to the Antarctic, and you are going to stand there and you are going to recite the words we taught you after so-and-so reads their thing because they're Sir John Franklin. And so-and-so, like, it just feels very fifth grade school play to me as the non-teacher on the call.
I think we did it. That's the end. As the person who's new to the show, I'm excited to see what's coming up.
It's so much. It's going to be a lot.
Can't wait. I think the setup was spectacular. I think it's kept me hooked. And I think that even if we weren't watching this for a podcast episode, I would have hit next.
Yes. We had to fight to not hit next, actually.
Yeah. Otherwise, we would have gotten confused. We would have started talking about episode 2, and I already have too much to talk about.
Yeah.
Cannot be done. Okay, so until next time, we would love to hear from you. Please check us out at Binge O'Clock Pod on Twitter and Facebook, where you can answer the question, what's your most annoying dinner party story? You can also email us at bingeoclockpod@gmail.com. And don't forget, we have a Patreon. Find us at patreon.com/clockpod.
That's right. And tell your friends, tell your family, tell your loved ones, tell the live lobsters in your life about Binge O'Clock, and we will see you next time.
You see, it depends on how drunk you get me, because maybe 10 years ago, it would have been, I would not have been able to stop talking about Golden Age Wonder Woman, right? And Pink.
That's true.
But now it's right now, you sat me down at a dinner party and you put some Mandera wine and some port in me and some Allsops, and you were like, Nella, what's on your mind lately? Tell us an amusing story. Suddenly you would be knee deep in the Franklin expedition, and I regret nothing because now this is my whole personality.
You're
now.
This podcast is in fact my most annoying dinner story.
I was like the John Barrow of this podcast, where I was like, well, we're doing the terror and I'm coming on as your guest and you just have to accept these marching orders. I was the John Barrow the whole time.
Also the Nella is obsessed with this and needs to put it somewhere, which, you know, spoiler alert, she might also, you know, this might bleed into her YouTube channel. I might be forced to make
a video. I mean, no promises.
Into her thing. No pressure. But I also love that it's like, but you're going to get very busy any minute now because summer is looming. It's like the pack ice on the horizon.
Yeah.
So we have to do this podcast. We have to do this podcast before we get stuck.
So that's why we're here. So yeah, I would be the most obnoxious dinner companion right now because I would not be able to stop talking about this expedition.
And I would love you for it.
Well, you married me, so you're stuck now. You're welcome. I'm going to tell you again about Birdshit Island, Joy. I've already talked about Guano Islands.
I know.
You think I can't just pull up Guano Islands in my repertoire? I've got it. I am the James Fitzjames of this relationship.
I am the Fitzjames.